This isn't really a video I was jumping at to make. I wasn't really enthusiastic about the idea of talking at length on a public forum about a friendship I lost. But I think losing friends, or rather cutting off friends, or even just the general concept of having severed connections because of transition and because of our demographic, it's an important thing to discuss with other trans people. But I really didn't think that I would lose a friend because of their lack of support over trans rights. Because I've been making friends pretty specifically with people of a similar political ideology as me for quite some time now. I knew I would lose my family, I knew I would lose my parents, I was prepared for that. But I didn't lose any friends when I transitioned because I was already friends with decent people. And sure, I have disagreed with this individual before, but I thought she was a decent person. Unfortunately, you guys called it. This is the individual from my "Gender is what the bouncer says it is" video, the one who abandoned me, who I told like, hey, I can't stay on stage, security's kicking me off, and did not follow me off. It is that person. The cracks were already starting to show before that video, but I think seeing all the comments on that video and knowing I wasn't crazy also helped set the ball rolling on helping me walk away from this friendship. So we haven't spoken for a couple months, despite the fact that we live together, because we had a conversation that I initiated where I was like, hey, I want to have this discussion with you. We had the discussion, it went horrible, and now we just haven't spoken outside of like discussions about rent. But she had this bad habit of whenever I would bring up a political attack on trans people, she would diminish it. She would downplay it. She'd be like, oh, don't get a driver's license that has a female gender marker on it. If I told her about the fact that like trans people were having their driver's license confiscated. When I told her about V-coding, she said, oh, just don't get arrested. When I told her about the fact that like ICE was starting to like target and round up trans people, she'd be like, well, I haven't heard about that, and just don't go to like a protest or whatever and you'll be fine. It's like every time I was like, hey, this legislation, this administration, this legal attack is being made on the demographic that I'm part of, the person that you theoretically are friends with and like, she'd be like, well, just like be less trans, or don't worry about it, or that's not happening because I haven't heard about it, or like it's not that big a deal. She's also like made so many weird comments about my body. Like she would point out that my ears were uneven. I came home and I was like, oh, it's weird. I started this new job and one person the other day asked me if I was part black and another person asked me if I was Italian, and I just don't understand why. And immediately she's like, oh, it's probably because of your big fucking nose. I once came out of my room because I had been posing in the mirror and I was like, hey, look, I've been working out so much now that you can see my lats from the front. And her knee-jerk response was, remind me not to work out that much because I would hate for that to be on my body. The thing that made me finally snap and be like, hey, stop saying things about my body was when we were at the pool. And she looks over at me and she's like, does it bother you that your nipples are just always hard now? It's one thing to like point out all of these things about a friend's body and physical appearance. It's a completely other thing to do it to someone who is undergoing a lot of physical changes, posts pretty regularly on social media to transphobes who then pick apart their appearance and as such is self-conscious about their body. Like I know I'm hot, but I'm also really self-conscious. Like the two can coexist. On one hand, I'm so sexy, and I know that. On the other hand, I think I'm sexy in totality, but there are things that bother me about like individual aspects of my personhood. And she gave me like new insecurities in addition to like poking at ones that I already had. It got to a point where there was a several month stretch before I had the conversation with her where the voice I heard in my own head when I looked in the mirror and was being critical of myself was not my voice. It was not a disembodied voice. It was her voice that I was hearing. I am angry. But after thinking to myself, I think I do want to move out. Mostly because I'm getting a new job. It's a daytime job. My roommates work night shifts. I think it's just time for us to like split ways anyway. I kind of just want my own space. I would like to be closer to my work anyway. This friendship might survive better if were just friends and not roommates, okay, let me have a conversation with her because we are friends and I would like to preserve that relationship. And it's unfair to her if I'm upset at her, but I haven't communicated why. So I bring up the first thing where I'm like, hey, you keep making these comments about my body, you gotta stop. And she was like, okay, yeah, that's sensible. And then once that went well, I was like, hey, it also bothers me how whenever I bring up trans issues with you, you're always very dismissive of it. Because the last trans straw on the trans camel's back was we were having a conversation about the upcoming Harry Potter show, and we both agreed that it was going to be bad because, you know, Creativity's Day, the reboot seems unnecessary. Like, what are we doing here? And upon agreeing about that, I then added, also, I just don't want to support J.K. Rowling because she's really transphobic. And she kind of just looks at me blankly like, okay. And J.K. Rowling is, like, very well known for, like, being Britain's biggest transphobe. And then, like, instead of just engaging with what I'm saying, she's immediately pushing back and being like, does J.K. Rowling even make money off the Harry Potter franchise? Well, I think it's weird that you're boycotting J.K. Rowling, who's just one person, but like you'll watch Disney. So many just weird things that don't matter in the context of the conversation, just trying to throw the onus and responsibility off of her to like hear what I'm saying and throw it back onto me for saying it in the first place. Also, fun fact, we had canceled our Disney Plus subscription by this point and hadn't used Disney Plus in several months by the time we had this conversation. So I don't even know what that comment was. And when we have the conversation after I tell her to stop making comments about my body and say, hey, you don't react well when I talk about trans stuff, she's like, I don't think that's fair. And I was like, explain, elaborate. And she's like, I don't know, like, how do you expect me to react? Obviously, I'm not going to care about trans stuff as much as you are, which is like such a weird thing to say about any political stance. Obviously, a person of their own demographic is statistically going to care about plights of their own demographic more. But it's crazy to hear me say that and then for your automatic response to be like, oh, well, I just think it's unrealistic of you to expect that I care as much as you do, when that was never the thing I was asking. I tried to explain to her, but I think even at this point, this early into the conversation, I was like, no, I think this friendship's ending. And she's just like, well, I can just not say anything if you don't want me to say anything, which is very passive aggressive and is just a way to be like, oh, well, I'll just censor myself. Like, oh, you want me to like not have an opinion? Okay, I just won't have an opinion. Like, fuck off. I want you to care about human rights. And I tried explaining to her, hey, when you were upset about the executive order stating that people whose names don't match their birth certificates would have a more difficult time voting, and you realized that that would affect women who are married and like change the maiden name. If I was just like, oh, well, don't change your maiden name, wouldn't you be upset? And then she was like, oh, I don't get why we're talking about this. I thought we were talking about trans stuff. I think I was realizing in real time, oh, I've been friends with a fucking moron. Her inability to interact in any meaningful way with a hypothetical whose point I felt was very clear, being like, would you not be disappointed in me morally if I wasn't upset by this thing that's objectively upsetting? Not just the thing that upsets you, but is objectively upsetting. She, after a few more examples, was like, well, if you didn't care about abortion being banned, I guess I'd be mad at you for like 5 minutes, but then I'd move on. And that's kind of when I realized, oh yeah, she's right. I'm trying to convince this person that our friendship would be fractured if I did not stand up for her rights. But she doesn't respect herself enough to even have that viewpoint. I'm talking to someone who hates herself and is still friends with men who have those viewpoints. And I had this flash of insight because a few months prior to this conversation, she was ranting about one of our coworkers, her friends, because they disagreed on something. He's a man, she's her. She was talking to him about apparently this clip that went viral on Twitter of a woman being gang assaulted, raped by like multiple men. From her description, it's very obvious this girl's being raped. She is supine on her back, limbs splayed out, very dazed look in her eyes. And her friend, her male frat boy friend, is like, well, no, her eyes are open. She's into this. And my roommate came home upset about this, rightfully so. For me, that would have been the end of a friendship. For her, a week later, they slept in the same bed after a party. So I think I realized, yeah, you don't respect either yourself or your own morals or your own ideology enough to be affected by a friendship that would have this dynamic. I'm realizing that now because you are friends with people who don't respect you or your demographic. I didn't say this because it wasn't worth saying at the time, and because I also just don't think she would have gotten it. I think she would have felt like I was blaming her and telling her that she was the worst person, which I think is true. She also said some bullshit about, sure, people get arrested for having miscarriages that the state thinks is an abortion, or sure, legal immigrants get detained by ICE, but that's just when you sue and you get a big bag. As if you have a fair shot within the system that enabled that behavior in the first place. And also as if like just getting a big bag makes up for like emotional trauma, financial trauma, the possibility of having lost a job, perhaps your face and name has now been associated with this pretty publicly, any abuse you might have faced during your imprisonment or confinement or incarceration. I realized I'm just like talking to this harmful person who genuinely does not care. And I think she was making me worse, like as a person, because I had decentered men myself. I didn't have men in my life. It takes a lot for me to be friends with a man because I've met so many men and been disappointed by most of them. It's not that I don't want to have male friends. It's not that I'm going out of my way not to have male friends. It's just typically whenever I meet a man, he doesn't impress me or very actively repulses me with his opinions. But I didn't take it far enough. In decentering men, I kind of centered women without realizing that I could be centering a woman who centers men. And as such, because of that relationship I have that I'm like placing value in and investing in, patriarchal ideals are leaking their way into me via not a man, but a woman. You know, I got. Everything is so clear to me now. I'm like viewing our entire relationship with a clarity that I unfortunately was not fortunate enough to have at the time just throughout our friendship. But like, she was holding me to patriarchal standards, and because I cared about her deeply and her opinion mattered a lot to me, I subconsciously was trying to fulfill them. Because verbally she would acknowledge I was non-binary, but she never treated me like I was non-binary. She always treated me like either a man that she was free to emasculate because verbally she could say that it's because I'm non-binary, or she was treating me like a woman. Alternatively, third category, she would treat me like her gay bestie. But like, she would make fun of my body count. She mentioned all the time that like I haven't slept with anyone in a while, and then I would say to her, well, if I had the same amount of self-respect you did for yourself, I would get laid all the time. And I have a small penis, which I'm very open about, and she would very often just rag on people who have small penises as like a moral failing. And I'd be like, hey, by the way, whenever you say like, oh, and if you have a small dick, you should die, you are talking about me. I'm part of that. And she'd be like, oh, Quinn, but you're non-binary, so like you shouldn't care as much. And she would use my identity and my own like relationship with myself as a manner of excusing herself to emasculate me, because she would be like, oh, well, like you shouldn't care about being emasculated because you don't even want to be a man. Despite the fact that emasculation stems not from like masculinity, but from disrespect. She would just give herself the free option to disrespect me under the guise of being like, oh, but I'm being supportive of your identity. She would take her own liberties with my identity. I wasn't necessarily non-binary to her. I was a sliding scale of masculinity dependent on how much that benefited her or inconvenienced her at the time. One day she would emasculate me and feel fine about doing that, but on the other I'd be too much of a man, because if I was standing too close to her at the club, I was scaring off the hoes, despite the fact that I was wearing makeup, had a purse, and was in a dress at the time. We didn't ever really have a real friendship. I was just the person she spent time with when she didn't want to be alone. I was one step up from her being alone with her own thoughts. And whenever we were in group settings, she would then diminish me. I was a social credit to be expended that she could climb on top of. Early in our friendship, told her about the fact that I was molested as a child. The way I told this story was very funny, because the situation was kind of black comedy funny. I, as a natural comedian and just gifted storyteller, was able to turn the story about me being molested into a little bit of a comedy. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's still a story about 8-year-old me being molested. One time our other roommate invited a guy over, and a few minutes into the group discussion, the friend that I've been talking about says to this man, "Hey, Quinn has a hilarious story about something that happened to them at a spa." And it took me a couple seconds to realize, are you talking about the story where I get molested as a child? And this would happen on multiple occasions. Not specifically that, but whenever we were in a group of 3 or more, I was the heel. And I'll proudly be the heel. But like, she was like making me the group's social sacrificial lamb. She would always like push me to the ground and then climb on top of me so that she could like dominate conversation using me as a pedestal. At a certain point, after you realize all of that, after you have a conversation with her, like kind of confronting her about it, and she very obviously doesn't seem like she's going to change. In addition, no longer being able to envision being able to tell supposedly what's supposed to be a close friend of yours about political strife that you are concerned about, and also realizing that she doesn't really seem to care about much of the like horrible shit going on in this world. Also, she genuinely thinks that Jim Carrey was replaced and with a doppelganger actor. I kind of just realized there's nothing to respect here, there's nothing to like here, there's nothing to value here. There's nothing. In fact, if anything is here, if anything is actually here and present in this form, I should hate it. It took me a long time. It took me like 2 years, but I think finally I've realized, yeah, I think I hate you. So yeah. That's how I ended a friendship over trans rights, among other things. But yes, thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel. You could become a patron by clicking the link in the description, or just join my community in other ways that don't cost you money. Tell me about horror stories that you've had with your friends, or former friends. And truly, if you only have one friend and they treat you like shit and you're worried about being alone, just be alone. Like, my social life has drastically decreased because, like, sure, I have other friends, but this friend is one I live with, so it's like, oh, we used to watch movies together when we were home. So the daily interactions I have with like a friend have been eliminated from my life. But while I do feel like less stimulated and like a little bit lonelier in a like physical sense, I feel much healthier, and I feel like I have a greater respect for myself. And I also feel like I've cut ties with people who were holding me back, like socially and morally. Like, ever since I stopped being friends with this individual, I think I've become a better person. My views on feminism are rounding out a lot more. Like, having a real world experience with a woman who upholds patriarchy herself and being able to decenter her has like helped my viewpoint of feminism a lot. And I think I've gotten better at not idealizing individuals as much. I don't know, I feel like mature and smart and like well-rounded now. And I've also started my new court reporting job. So like once that paycheck comes in, I don't know. I think I'm just in a good new chapter of my life. And cutting this person off is really helping cement the fact that I'm moving on in more ways than one. So, yes, thank you. Love you. You're doing great. Bye.